Well, good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon entitled How to Avoid the Pitfalls of Microservices. This is sponsored by Sumo Logic. I am your host, Steve Prentice, and I am joined today by JP Morgenthau, and he is the expert that is going to be sharing with us today a number of issues and points about the pitfalls with microservices. He is an internationally renowned thought leader and an advisor and an author. He has an encyclopedic knowledge of this topic. And as you will see, he's a terrific speaker. So JP, hi, welcome.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me.
It's a great pleasure. It's a fantastic topic and opportunity. So really just want to get to some of the housekeeping stuff just to start. This is intended to last for an hour till the bottom of the next hour, and we're focusing on three specific pitfalls of moving to microservices. For everyone who's joined us today, we welcome your questions and comments throughout the session. Rather than waiting for a Q&A at the end, please just send us your questions. We want this to be more of a discussion than a lecture. So go ahead and chat using the on-screen window, or if you wish to, you can also post it to Twitter using the hashtag SumoLogicChat. So that's how you can keep in touch with us. Basically, our agenda, as I said, we'll have three key topics to talk about and some polls to go through as well. And just some more housekeeping stuff for you and your comfort in using the application here today. You'll see that at the bottom of the screen, there are multiple application widgets you can use. These are all resizable and movable, so you feel free to move them around as you wish to get the most out of your desktop space. You can expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the arrows on the top right-hand corner. If you have any questions, as I said, you can submit them through the Q&A box, and a copy of the presentation today will be made available shortly and within a day or so afterwards, and you can use the same registration link to access that. For best viewing opportunity and experience, we recommend a wired internet connection if you have it, and also perhaps closing any additional browser sessions you have running in the background, which could cause some issues. This is being streamed through the computer, so there is no dial-in number for the attendees, of course. Just simply communicate through the questions box. And for best audio quality, just make sure your computer speakers or your headset are turned on and that the volume is up so you can hear us. So that's what we can talk about in terms of setting these things up here. Some networks do advance the slides a little bit more slowly than others, so you may wish to log off your VPN if you are using one. And if there's any other questions or concerns you have, you can find answers in the help widget at the bottom of the screen. So that's where we are going to be today, talking about the pitfalls of microservices. Now, just before we get started with the first topic, we do have some polls. We'd love to ask you your feedback just to find out who we have online, who are you dealing with, what are your questions and thoughts and your opinions about this. So as we're listening to JP's first topic here, feel free to make your comments or check off which is your current position on microservices in your organization, and we will come back with the results very shortly. So JP, if you are good to go, let's talk about pitfall number one. This is the problem of decomposition, moving from a monolithic situation to the obvious broken up and containerized notions of microservices. So what, JP, is the problem with decomposition?
Okay, so great question. It isn't one problem. Decomposition in and of itself is a really complex task. You're taking an architecture for an application that was probably designed and built for one particular runtime environment. And you're now, and for various reasons, a lot of them being the cost and overhead in time and money for maintaining this monolithic set of capabilities and functions. And you've decided that you'd be better off if you were to take specific subsets of that functionality and isolate them into their own deployable function set that that you can then consume from within other applications. Hence the microservice. And so as you do that, there are a number of things that you're attempting to do on that path. The first is, well, it's like a turkey. You're going to carve out some meat out of the turkey. How do you approach the turkey? What's the best way to carve it up, right? These are the type of strategic decisions you think about before you start carving. Typically, the method and approach that we talk about in order to carve up this monolith is that you're going to break things out by their what we call a bounded context. It's representative capabilities from the perspective of the business. I'm going to update an account. Okay, I'm going to take money out of an account. And notice that I specifically called those out separately. And the reason I did that is because one of our tenets here is that we're also going to try to, as much as possible, get to doing one thing well within our microservices. So we don't want a big macro service concept anymore that's account management, because, again, even that has some connotations about what's glued together. And so, you know, the way or the rules required to take money out of an account, you know, and when it's tied to the rules about how to put money in an account, okay, they may have, you know, let's say regional implications. I may have to do different tax monitoring. So if I have to change the tax rules on the add money to an account, well, guess what? I now have to deploy the changes with for no reason, to take money out of the account. And then I have to test that I haven't messed anything up, right? That's what the macro concept causes, that account management. So if I do one thing well, if I break out, put money in an account, and there were tax rule changes for a particular country, now I can isolate them. I can next year add those rules, redeploy, update, and the entire system continues running without interruption. And I have my new rules, and it's very cost effective. It's very low overhead on the testing. Okay, great. That's the picture. That's the promise of what we're doing here. Now, one of the other things that we do as we move that and we carve out that functionality, we put it in a microservices, is that we're going to start thinking a little differently about what that thing is. In the past, we've trained developers and engineers and architects to think of that as remote functions, as if you were writing code, and instead of writing the function locally in one piece of code, you're now calling it over a network far away. But it should act just the same way, right? That is the essence of remote procedure calling. And now what we're telling them is, I don't want you to think of that as remote code. I want you to think of that as an asset. So let's use the analogy of a light switch. I have a light switch on the wall, and I want to turn it off, right? The old way of thinking is that we have this light switch object, and I'm going to tell it turn on and turn off. It has behaviors. It's almost object-oriented, if you will. And I operate the switch. So it's the same as I can move that switch anywhere. It could be on my desk, and I move it up and down, or it could be on the other side of the room, and I still would move it up and down. But now it's an asset. Now it's light switch, and it may be part of a group of light switches in the house. And instead of telling it to turn on and turn off, I instead will now I will access that light switch as a resource, a named resource, light switch 1, and I will specifically change its internal state. So I will send it its new internal state, and part of that new internal state will say that it is, you know, what mode is it in? It's up or it's down. And then when the change to the state occurs, whatever that change of state occurs, whether it turn the light on or turn the light off, is regardless. You may want up to be off and down to be on. You can do that. But the change in thinking that I now have this that everything's an asset, and that I communicate the internal representation of that asset as the way I operate on things. It's a huge change functionally from what we've trained designers and architects and how to build systems over the past 20 years. And I see a lot of the engineers and architects struggling with the development of these interfaces to change from the API perspective, the direct call with parameters, to I have this URI identifiable object, asset, and I'm going to then post to that asset it's state change. So those are some of the things that are behind the scenes that really make this, even though microservice, right? It sounds small, it sounds easy, sounds really simple, especially when we talk about doing one thing well, right? It even makes it sound even more simple, right? How could this one small, simple thing be so complex? Because it's the ecosystem in which it will live that makes the whole architecture of microservices really complex and really requires strong architectural understanding of distributed computing to do it well.
Right. So there's a lot of
question, Will.
Yeah, I think the issue of the light switch, or the analogy of the light switch, is an excellent one. And we've just got a question here from let's see, we got here from Robert, actually, who just wants to know, well, okay, fine, what companies can you refer to that have done this well in terms of taking on this monumental change? Do you have a particular case study of an organization that has successfully taken on this change to microservices?
Well, there are some great stories. I can't talk, obviously, anyone I've worked with, I can't reveal publicly what they have or haven't done well. But I will say that there are some great references on the web that are truly good stories. For example, Upwork is one of them that is building software. It's what they do for a living, and they develop a software application. However, they've had to address the implications of building a monolith and what it costs to maintain. Even newer companies, Honeycomb.io on Microservices Journal, we have an article from them. They're a company that's building a monitoring product for web scale type operations, and they also, did their initial development and realized that, wow, there are a lot of hurdles to maintaining this particular code base, and every time we go to change, it's costly. How can we break this up and leverage the concept of microservices to make a difference? So Airbnb, there's an article out there by one of their engineers, Melanie Sebula, that I thought really captured well some of her challenges and the challenges of her team in moving to microservices. So yeah, they're out there. They're good stories, and I can definitely, from reading their stories, relate that these are actual problems and not just individuals writing for the sake of trying to get their name out there. They're sharing real valuable information.
Well, Airbnb is an excellent example. I know that she had said that I think it was 500,000 lines of code was their tipping point to say we need something better than the way it's being done right now. So just as we're going through this, just want to stop and check in with the poll that we conducted here, because your current position on microservices, we have a good number of people who are live online here today, well over 50%. Who are actively integrating the system. So that's a very interesting observation right there, in that fully over half are looking at ways in which to make this happen and are doing this. So it's something that is happening, it's in real time. And the other, currently we have, as you see here, 42.9% who are considering moving to this. And 0 people have said that we do not know enough about it. So it's very much an ongoing concern. There are a number of organizations out there who are looking to customize services down to specifics. And I remember you were mentioning to me Uber, and I think it's because Uber is such a groundbreaking organization everyone knows about. It's kind of like McDonald's as a case study opportunity. I remember, JP, you were telling me about the notion of puppies. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that and how that refers to the microservices concept?
Did you say puppies? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you were telling me a while back about how Uber was setting up a system by which they could send particular types of cars, not just simply any available car, but specific kind of car. Maybe I misheard you there, but that's what I.
No. The puppy was just the example of a car, or it was about how do you field and really, so it's about composability of systems, right? These are great. Microservices are great, one of the upside or downstream values of moving this is that, can you modify dynamically systems that you've already, developed? And one of the examples I had read was about how, Uber wanted to be able to not develop a specialized logic to in order to filter out and best match you with what you as a rider are looking for, right? So they can, the basics are, is the car geographically near you? Is this a driver that you have maybe said you didn't want to work with in the past? Does it have the right amount of seating, right? But then, what about adding value on? Well, we don't want to change the back end every single time or the service to represent that, right? So the idea that you can filter through a pipelining of services to then insert this new logic into the chain to say, in addition, do they like puppies? Right? And it's like, oh, yes, they do like puppies. So then this car is good for them. Or no, they don't like puppies. Okay, well that filters out these particular cars that are puppy oriented, so to speak, right? So it was just an example of ways in which you can then further extend the architecture so that you're not having to so that you can leverage the architecture to put your business logic where it best belongs, and offering you the greatest opportunity for composability. Without having to, basically change your entire system, which, has tremendous value when you think of years of, we went through waterfall upgrades where 6 months of planning, 6 months of development, which 2 of it were planning, 2 of it were development, 1 of it was testing, deployment, and then you hoped everything was right. And then if you wanted to this kind of requirement came along, right? They might have to wait another 6 months. And on top of that, you had to take the system down and take a maintenance window in order to implement that, right? Now it's like, hey, this is something that people are asking for. Give me 1-2 week sprint and let's push it out. And boom, hey, we can even canary test it because we really haven't unwired anything. Our existing system is exactly the way it was before. All we did was kind of insert this new logic, but it's not what customers like. It's not working the way we intended. Let's pull it out. Hey, the system's running exactly the way it was before. So you can, maybe test with a subset of an audience. You could, feel easily, that you could easily roll back changes. That gets more to the promise in general of why you do want to move to microservices. You can't really do that with the monolith.
Okay, well, that leads me to the next question I get from Martin Rowland here, who's saying, who should be involved in this? Because this is such a huge, groundbreaking, well, I'm just interpreting what he's saying here, but this is such a groundbreaking change to an organization. This is not simply, obviously, just an IT department. Who should be involved, and what sort of project planning have you seen companies undertake to make a shift in terms of scale and also in terms of timelines? I mean, this is a big shift. So who should be involved, and how much time should this take?
Right. Well, it's a great question. In fact, our pitfall number 3 is directly tied to the answer to that question. So I will bring it up here now, and we won't worry about it later. And pitfall number 3 is a failure to include the business and think that this is just an IT initiative. First and foremost is that these bounded contexts. You're driving a architecture that is heavily tied to the overall essence of what the business is trying to achieve, right? Part of why we want to do this is to be almost just in time, which is a term that many people are using now. Just in time, meaning that we're about to enter. We have pre-sprints or sprints that are planning in preparation for a development sprint, in which the product owners in an agile sprint or agile scrum software development lifecycle are getting together to prioritize what are the next set of user stories that are going to be worked on. And during that sprint, obviously, the business owner wants to bring in a set of capabilities that are hot for the moment for the business. Now, when you first started out, maybe, you had a Facebook integration as on the top of your list. And now you're 2 or 3 sprints down and you realize, wow, this particular e-commerce capability is more important than that Facebook integration. I'm going to get more at adding this e-commerce feature. So the beauty is that, you would, and this is agile in general, this isn't just microservices, right? But it's about having that business capability. And then having the business kind of determine with IT what are the right contexts for a service. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it right. That's a big, now we start to talk about the larger essence and issue behind all this, right? Who's paying for this? There's IT budget, but a lot of times the business is providing funding for IT to develop an application so, to support its function. There are a number of business units and there are a number of different business requirements coming from all our aspects of the business into IT for help. And there has to be a prioritization. And part of that is also, I'm paying, the business is paying budget to get this stuff built, right? So for years, the business has been very suspect of any kind of failure of IT. So if IT said, hey, the first version of this was great. It was a good try. We're going to throw it away and do version 2. The immediate thinking of the business is, you failed. You wrote something that wasn't useful. Why would I want to pay you to do the next version? And so there's a cultural change inside the business, bringing the business along, understanding where we're going with these things, that they're not designed to be right the first time out of the box. Right? People talk about Microsoft as a version 3 company. Microsoft doesn't get it right till version 3. Yeah, sure, there's some early adopters, but you really want to wait till version 3 till it's solid, right? And that's because there's a certain aspect of this which is, I wrote it the first time based upon what I knew. I didn't know what I didn't know, and the fact that these microservices are small, they're lightweight. We can operate on them and modify them quickly and deploy them into an ecosystem without driving or making too much of an impact to the ecosystem at large, and we can deploy often, means that we have the opportunity to take chances to fail fast. So sure, let me throw version 1 out there. Let me see how it's consumed. And then, based upon that data, I'm going to come out with version 2, right? But you have to help the business to understand that it doesn't pay economically to maintain that set of code, that 500 lines of code that make up that microservice, and keep modifying it and putting Band-Aids on it, when it's just as equally effective cost-wise to rewrite version 2 and then rewrite version 3 in the same way, right? Each time improving upon the interface, how easy it is to consume and how optimally it runs. So that's an amazing. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, that's an amazing concept in terms of a management philosophy, which is again something that is very is lost in the clouds of time, especially with more senior managers who become a little bit more conservative about making changes. So this agility, it goes well beyond just simply switching to microservices or having this version 3 mindset, but the agility, as you said, of being willing to fail and even fail publicly and to write it over again. That sort of really points to a major mindset shift across the company itself. Now, this leads me to the next question that we just got, but before bringing the next
question
by the way,
just to clarify, that's what we're calling the digital transformation. The digital transformation for a business isn't the change to having mobile clients and using IoT. The digital transformation is about helping legal understand the ramifications, HR understand the ramifications,
right?
Understanding a great example is also, how do you buy this stuff, right? You're buying from vendors. The whole change from I buy a package and I pay I'm willing to pay a license for to use software, but this whole subscription thing that drives procurement crazy. I mean, because it's never ending. When do I stop needing the subscription? Do I ever stop needing the subscription? Do I have to allocate budget for that in an ongoing basis? Will the subscription price increase on a year-to-year basis? We don't know unless, there's a longer-term contract. So they've moved forward, with the concept of licensing. I'll buy a 2 to 3 year, I'll have an enterprise licensing deal at a fixed cost to use so much, consume so much. But that's about the state of the art for procurement in a world in which, they're buying how many seats of Salesforce.com, and I see what's happening over time is they're starting to see the bills, and then they start to say, well, you're not in the group of people who can use it. We have X amount of license, and that's it, because they're trying to control their spend. They can't deal with variable spend. And so this whole as a service hasn't been indoctrinated. So this gets to, what is a microservice? Well, it is as a service. It's the heart of as a service. And if you don't help procurement understand and finance understand, the CFO, how to buy variable quantities on a variable basis and need, you're never going to get past and where you need to be to compete against the disruptive companies that don't have these barriers.
Excellent. Yeah, and the summary of having that, summarizing it as an as a service, that really sort of paints it into a much clearer picture that really moves into the mindset that is required. And as you said, this is looking at pitfall number 3 here in terms of the fact that this is an entire business initiative rather than simply just the new technological rollout. Now, I just want to take a question from Benir, who wrote in a couple of minutes ago. But before doing that, for you guys online right now, just wanted to put forward the next or second of our polls. And this is what you see as your biggest challenge to getting microservices deployed in your organization or agreed upon. We see that most people are doing it right now, which is terrific. But what are your challenges here? And you can see our choices on the screen. So feel free to fill that out as you go. But just want to throw you a question, JP, from Benir here, who says that the main problems faced within the infrastructure of microservices platforms with our clients is the issue of management and monitoring of this end-to-end environment of the application and communication with services. So what is the best practice? And we're talking here end-to-end, once again, perhaps from a management perspective or an IT ops perspective. Are there any best practices?
Yeah, there are actually, and in all fairness, they're emerging, right? This is a new area. Yes, it stems from some of the early learned lessons in building distributed applications, an end-tier web application with content network in front of it and distribution globally. Sure, web scale, absolutely. Where those are all very difficult to maintain and monitor those systems because there's so many different components that are tightly integrated. And when you scale out, when you start to develop, something on the order of thousands of these microservices, the first thing I put forth, in the design, right? And this is funny because we didn't really get to talk about the role of architecture, right? And that's really why I helped found the Microservices Journal, was as a community for architects to come together around this area because it touches on so many other things. What is it that you're building a microservice for, and what role does it play in the development of today's software environment and the way that it participates as back-end handlers for a whole media front end that's changing, including IoT sensors and mobile devices, right? So they, in many regards, they become the first bastion of interface support for those mediums. So they play such a unique role, and they touch so many different things that, sure, when you do one thing well and it's small, you can talk about it quickly and you can come together and have and decide, 1 week before you're going to build and deploy a microservice that this is what it should do, this is what it is, and, a week or two later after a sprint, deploy it into production. And that works, and it doesn't seem like it needs a lot of architecture. And that one service doesn't, where architecture as a whole is starting to really be required, is the framework and environment in which this microservice will live. And part of that is understanding, what can I monitor from the outside? And what do I have to monitor from inside? There's a lot of focus, and has been for years, that I can monitor everything from the outside. Even great tools like AppDynamics and Dynatrace, right, and CA, they're great. They can watch things from the Java virtual machine perspective and route performance and, the whole application performance management realm. But that doesn't get you true understanding of how something is actually being utilized, which gets to the heart that, yes, these things may be simple and small, but we can't forget that instrumentation and telemetry need to be given off by these microservices, and they need to support interfaces for that telemetry. And I have seen very little actually emphasis on this going all the way back to when we did SOA and prior before that web services. It's never really been a major factor for organizations to include the instrumentation and the telemetry. But as you start to get into interaction models and the dependency chains that start to form when you have such high volumes of microservices being created, remember we're getting much more fine granular in our approach here, then those things become critical to even having a operational capability around managing a microservices environment and knowing what exactly is happening within that environment. And that environment itself, including the fact that we have things like distributed data management now, where microservices are supposed to, in some way, shape, or form, manage their own statefulness if it is required. It's not supposed to share state with other microservices because that breaks the tenant and kind of drives us back towards monolithic behavior. And so, all those things are, I wouldn't say they're best practices yet, but they are part and parcel of putting together a strategy. I would say that a better way to think about it is, what is a strategy that you could put together for managing end-to-end this entire ecosystem?
Right. So there's got to be a lot of energy put into the development of a strategy and the communication of that strategy as a best practice. So, Binir, I hope that's an answer for you. It's a fascinating area of development. While you were speaking, of course, I was just checking out the results of the poll and what people see as their biggest challenge. And it's quite interesting to see that from our group here. We've got fully over half of the group of responding here. So you can see an interesting split, a very equitable split here, kind of, with regards to the complexity of the code being a challenge, but also, once again, a lack of buy-in and just that tie to the existing system. And interestingly enough, as you see here, that there's not a sense of urgency. Now, all of those seem to raise some interesting questions, JP. Is there anything you want to leap on there as a red flag?
Well, my first question comes to mind when I see the lack of buy-in. I don't know if that's a technical management buy-in from those scarred and jaded from the SOA days, or is it a lack of buy-in from the senior management that, we're going to give, increased funding to IT to handle this first, and that gets to not enough urgency as well. I think those kind of two are probably in some regards tied together into a common reasoning. It's, all right, it's below the IT iceberg problem, right? Hey, IT, I gave you $150 million for the year. It's your problem, Mr. CIO, how to divvy that up. Oh, you mean you were born and raised in the era of infrastructure and ops, and all you really think about still is storage and servers and boxes and enterprise licenses? You don't actually fully comprehend how to build out or the implications of the design of this software on your business long term. That is a reality that I see every single day. So it becomes imperative that the businesses, again, culturally start to change and recognize that disruptive businesses that in there don't have first of all, they don't have the technical debt that a large enterprise will have. Keeping them from moving forward. And a lot of this is, it's going to come back, and technical debt is exactly called technical debt for a reason. It's you're borrowing from the future. And the question of when you get bit is just a matter of when, not if. You will get bit. And when you get bit, how bad will that be? I know a company that played, very footloose with this whole technical debt issue, and their system, an insurance system, was down for 2 weeks, right? Because you could have taken care of this. You could have done activities like this. You could have started, using strangle patterns to cut off older legacy stuff that was brittle and start to reformulate it using microservices. But you chose to instead spend the money on another storage array versus seeking alternative storage solutions. Maybe even your own data center companies will provide you storage as a service or gateways into the public cloud. You got to own your own SAN and manage your own SAN and hire NetApp engineers and EMC Dell engineers and HP engineers all simultaneously, because you have to have all three, right? This is the type of stuff that is destroying the opportunities for IT to be a hero and actually derive for their business the value that they're supposed to, and instead driving shadow IT.
So do you think there's an opportunity for people in IT to push forward? Because I'm really intrigued about the bottom thing here, that not enough urgency. So first off, our companies, when they're looking at the competition and seeing how fast, again, disruptive organizations are changing entire patterns of the economy here. I mean, the Uber is just one example, but another one that we were looking at recently was that of Royal Caribbean Cruises, which is a case study that's publicly available. We did a blog on that in support of this webcast. And the whole approach to changing the way in which they structure every single service, for the passengers themselves, right down to the human customer level. They took a huge change in running their fleet to accommodate weather patterns and individual requirements and how people even register for personal activities on the ships. So for organizations that may have a legacy, they've been around for years or decades, and they're watching their competition eat their lunch by leaping into these new disruptive changes. Do you think that this urgency thing is urgent unto itself, that people should wake up and say, hey, this is not a concept for next year, this is a concept for now?
Every executive should assume that there's a disruptive agent in their industry, whether they see them or not, okay? Because they are there. And the question is whether they've come to market yet and figured out how to penetrate their particular base, right? But make no bones about it, those disruptive agents exist. Now, in some cases, they're very bold and very outward. I mean, Amazon is still a disruptive agent, as big as they are. They just disrupted the grocery industry. They've just they started out disrupting the retail book chain industry. Everything they touch, they disrupt. They disrupted the compute industry, the infrastructure industry. Everything they touch, they are a competitor. And so, the question is, where is that competitor going to come from? And a lot of times you may not know. It may not be obvious. The airline industry could decide to get into some other part of hospitality, and the next thing you know, that hotels are now having to face competition from airlines because they start to allow you to use the planes overnight. Who knows, right?
Sure.
Everywhere you can find $1, you can find $1, right? You look at some of the new planes, the Dreamliners that have showers on them, right? Why not just rent that out to the person who's going to fly in it and let them stay there overnight? Don't have to get up in the morning and get to the airport. They're all checked in.
Sounds like a crazy idea, but all of these crazy ideas sooner or later end up becoming reality. So just another question. Just want to
remember this. Remember this for crazy ideas, Steve. Remember this for crazy ideas. Somebody sat in a room and said, "Hey, let's make a movie about sharks and tornadoes."
Yeah, right on. That's exactly. I mean, nothing is impossible. So I mean, from my standpoint, I mean, your background is in IT, and mine is more in terms of management and strategy. And these are the kind of things that I encounter all the time. Is people would say it's ridiculous. A Sharknado film just will never get made, and that's the fidget spinners will never get made, and those kind of mindsets continue. So just a question.
People had pet rocks in the 80s and 70s. So anything's possible. But to your point, what you do, management strategies, right? That is I would love our audience, to take away from this more than there is a lot of complexity. You do need some good technical engineers and architects to build a footprint in which to drive this and make this run efficiently for an organization. But just as important is the fact that that there is a mind shift, a leadership change outside of IT that embraces and wants to make this happen. because without that, you end up starting at the monolith, which is still today viewed as a below the IT iceberg problem, which IT is supposed to solve out of their existing budget. So gaining new budget to fix these problems and drive the opportunity to build new business processes quickly in days and hours instead of months and years is not an urgency because of that factor.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so moving from that to something a little bit more, I guess it's related here in terms of the brass tacks, but also the motivation. Just got a question from Tony, who's asking, whether you think the popularity of containers and more recently cloud serverless services like Lambda from Amazon Web Services and Azure functions are driving more microservices culture. Is that a key driver here?
It allows the function. So if you think about what it takes to build and deploy something in the past, before you had these cloud services available to you that quickly and readily made a simple algorithm available, a single algorithm available, right? You had to write the code, build the code. You had to write it to a particular application stack, and then you had to actually deploy the application stack on I'm talking just in development, the database, the app server, all the components. You had to make sure they were integrated. You had to make sure they were configured. And then you build your code and you test it against that environment locally. And then you would go to an integration test environment. And then somewhere in production, you have a production version of this application stack that you're going to deploy to, right? It's a lot of overhead and a lot of app infrastructure that is required to drive that. Whereas now you can take an algorithm, even from a test perspective. Gee, I just want to test this out. Does this work? Can I take this point A and write it to point B? In fact, I just did something very similar with this using Microsoft Flow, where I wanted to take all the tweets that from Twitter, and I wanted to just capture them in a database very quickly. So I used Microsoft Flow. It had an adapter to Twitter. It had an adapter to the Azure tables. And I simply just plugged them together to, here's my search pattern. If my search pattern is that it has 0 retweets, which would mean that it was just a brand new posting, then take this information and write it to this Azure table. And it was pretty much drag and drop with very, more configuration than any kind of coding. And it's been running. It's been putting, capturing all these things. Occasionally, and then I go get a spreadsheet from the database dump, and then I can quickly do some analysis on it, right? That is something very capable today because Twit is Twit is a service, not a microservice. Twit is a service. Azure Tables is a service. Flow created a microservice that consumed those larger macro services to give me a new capability. That is really what's happening. And so if I just want to test something quickly, if I take Lambda, for example, can I quickly go call this API and pull the data in and write it to DynamoDB, right? I can write a few lines of code in Lambda, push a button, deploy it, and test it. And then I just hook it up to an event timer and run it every 5 minutes. Sure, it worked. It didn't work. What am I using that for? Is that the application? Maybe that's the application. Maybe I was just testing something that would lead to a larger concept or something I would include in something else I'm building. So yeah, these technologies lend themselves to speed. And at the end of the day, and I have to give some credit to some of the people at AT&T who have helped really shape my thinking around this. But at the end of the day, I say there's a priority to what businesses want that microservices answers the mail on, and it's speed, cost, quality. And then also we add in user experience at the end for some. But in that order, right? People tell me day in, day out, I will pay you for speed. Sure, cost cutting is important. Reducing IT costs, that's important. Can you make this less expensive for me? Can you operate this less expensive for me? Can you help me save money? It costs, here's my TC, total cost of ownership. Can you do it for less? Absolutely, every day, all day from IT. But those same people will tell you, if you can help me get new functionality and market faster, I will pay you for that. And so speed, cost, quality, user experience, at the heart of all this microservices, that's what we're answering the mail on.
Beautiful. So building a better mousetrap. So as we're keeping an eye on our time here, we have 3 pitfalls to talk about today. So the third one, which we've listed as number 2, but that's fine because the dynamics are fantastic here. One of the pitfalls then is organizations not being prepared for the inevitable sprawl that happens when you break these things up into the actual services. So what can we say, JP, about this pitfall, not being prepared for sprawl?
Well, this gets back to my point earlier about architecture, right? The architecture isn't so much the architecture of the service, although there's a subset of functionality that I label the family jewels that are the algorithms that are critical to your business, whether it's something like, how to sell accounts, how you particularly handle a particular logistics operation, how you do your ordering for your retail outlets, and the algorithms that your business has built to help you be successful. Those are the family jewels, and they get built in a number of different ways. They get built in BPM tools. They get coded in, they're coded in COBOL and RPG and Java and C++, or over the years, right? So there's always that nugget, and then there's and beyond that, now we move to these microservices. I talk about them with regard to to the helping the formation or shape the formation of the disposable code era. And by disposable code, I mean back to that point of I'm going to write it. If I have something small that's single focused, I'm going to write it better the second time than I did the first time anyway. So I'm not going to bother, continually maintaining this for 5 years and keep modifying the code here and testing. I'm just going to throw version 1 away and release version 2. And so, not only do you have sprawl, but you have to manage on top of that sprawl. You're managing the version management of those things. You're managing their interdependencies. So you start to have to put a footprint down, a foundation. A solid foundation is required. That solid foundation includes things like repositories, registries, both design time and runtime registry support. It requires good monitoring and management tools for dynamic management of the microservices that are running, as well as understanding the relationship between the microservices that many app performance management tools can help you with today. It's also the tooling around your framework for managing large volumes of microservices, that telemetry and instrumentation that come off of those things, getting you to how are they linked to your business, right? Where do these microservices live? Are you just deploying them onto the open intranet, or are you putting them into domains? Are you putting your supply chain microservices in one domain, and you're putting your retail POS microservices in an alternate domain, right? Or are you just letting them all live together out there? Thinking about how you segregate and classify these services. Those are all things that are necessary, and they require what I would, a good, strong operational team that is trained in full stack engineering to really help drive and create that foundation that's going to allow you to manage thousands of these things effectively and not be at risk that people are introducing patterns that are of tight integration or too tight of dependency chain. Somebody once wrote, and a really great tweet on this, and I can only paraphrase it, but they're like, a microservice should be written so that it could be deleted and the rest of the system wouldn't know, which is a very hard design goal when you're starting out and thinking about these things, right? But, if you're thinking about a microservice that calls a microservice and it calls a microservice, you're starting to create anti-patterns for microservices architecture, because that dependency chain now makes it very hard. I can't change the bottom one without affecting a large part of the entire system and ecosystem. So those are some of the things that are necessary to think about with regard to what we call, what we identify with potential microservices sprawl.
Yeah, I mean, nesting services like that moves them from being microservices to almost like a little blockchain. I mean, you just cannot pull one out without the rest following along. Excellent.
It's true.
Yeah,
and I'll add one final thing for those people who, and I know there is maybe this is a little bit of me getting on my soapbox. I know that there's significant interest in leveraging container architecture as a means of deploying microservices, but I feel like some people are doing this because it's the hot, sexy thing to do, rather than the best appropriate architecture. And the reason I say that is each container contains within it the nugget of an operating system, and anybody who's done deployment of large-scale, infrastructure, so virtualized and non-virtualized, knows how difficult and complex it is when you have to maintain thousands of instances of things that contain nuggets of an operating system, for example. That operating system comes with it the need to update and contain and constantly make sure that it is locked down and secure. So you're either getting into a patching nightmare, which you're not supposed to do with container architecture. It's supposed to be immutable, or you still have a rolling update nightmare because you have to now replace thousands of containers on an ongoing basis, because every time there's a security patch to the Red Hat 6.5 nugget that you used in to the base of your container, you still have to manage all that, right? Whereas if you do an application, something like Lambda, right? Sure, you don't have as much control. True, you're hoping Amazon make sure that Lambda is constantly being tested for the most secure footprint possible, but Lambda never disappears, why they take it out of service to update the security. So it's always there, it's always available, it's always running, and you hope that as a service, Amazon is consistently improving the quality of it and ensuring that it's the most secure environment, right? So operationally, containers are, with plus sprawl, is potentially one of the most dangerous things to an enterprise.
Interesting. Excellent point. So this is, we're moving towards our last few minutes of the session. The hour goes by so quickly here, but just before I take another couple of questions, I just want to ask everyone out there, if you want to fill out the next and final of our polls, what you guys do see as the number one benefit of moving towards microservices. I mean, it kind of ties with the previous ones, but just a little poll as we go along. And as we do so, just wanted to take a question from Tony, is it? No, not Tony, but just want to take a question that came in just very, very recently on what sort of patterns, what are some of the patterns for how microservices can communicate with each other? So the technical communication question. That's from Dan.
I'm sorry,
from
Dan. Could you repeat
that? He wrote, what are some patterns for how microservices can communicate with each other?
It's a great question. Right now, a lot of what I'm seeing is that the microservices is, again, typically representing an asset, a URI addressable asset. The interfaces are HTTP-based primarily, but the URI is not necessarily HTTP-centric. JSON-type messaging, point-to-point. A lot of point-to-point. People are starting to now also connect up queue-based architectures for guaranteed delivery of messages to services and return of those messages. So, and in those cases, it's not even the more traditional ones necessarily. RabbitMQ, sure, but things like Kafka. So, that the actual flow and transactions across the services are event sourced, and then that Kafka queue is actually, or channel is actually represented longer term so that patterns of communications among these services can be analyzed by big data tools, and that patterns of consumption can be more easily assessed. So that's what we're seeing right now. I don't think we're deep enough into it to see an emergence go really beyond either the point-to-point or the pub-sub type communications mechanisms. The IoT is a separate special case in which you have things like MTTQ that are communicating with microservices over IP. But again, that's a specialized architecture for supporting mobile communications, but those are about the gist of what I see out there today implemented.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the question, Dan. I just want to just bring up the poll results for this last poll here. You can see that the number one benefit for those who responded, which was half of our group here, was faster time to market, followed by maintenance efficiencies and, yes, a need for ongoing modernization. So perhaps the sort of the flip side of the urgency is the need here to stay modern and stay up to date. Now, just the last question that I want to, I think it'll be the last question anyway. Pedram wrote a few minutes ago. How do you ensure the quality of the new versions of the microservices you deploy? So the quality assurance question here.
I think it's a general quality service. It's not necessarily, I don't think you necessarily think outside the box or have to think outside the box for microservice. Clearly, any kind of unit testing, right? You want to test it for performance. You want to test it for scale out. Those are the things you expect to get from uniquely to the microservice. Other than that, you want to test its code quality. You want to ensure that, the expectations are that, as you change the state of this resource, that is it stateful? Is it not stateful? Are the changes changing properly in the stateful environment? So again, from the dev side, looking at things from a test-driven development perspective, that actions that you expect to have happen are what actually occurs in the deploy and production. Load stress testing. And understanding, you get into more the fun stuff that if you look at Netflix OSS stuff that on open source, the chaos monkey stuff where, you have an ecosystem of these services and you then train the environment to go introduce chaos, either by shutting off a service or, starting to do a denial of service attack on a service. So, those are the types of things that you could do to ensure quality around the microservice architecture.
That's fascinating. That's a fascinating concept. It reminds me, there was a science fiction book called Ender's Game a while back, which is a kind of the same thing in terms of introducing chaos, introducing new random challenges to keep people alive and keep the skills completely up to date. So these are some fascinating examples and some fascinating answers. And as the hour rolls out here, my question to you is, we've mentioned a few well-known organizations here today as some case studies, but do you have anybody who you think stands out as really having done the best job of making this a success? I mean, you mentioned Netflix and Amazon, but who could people turn to as a case study to read publicly online on really how to do this for the next couple of years at least?
I've seen a lot of opinions and some experiences published. I think we have. I would turn more to the books. Sam Newman's book is a very well-regarded treatise on this environment, as well as the Martin Fowler articles that have been written on this to date. I think they are really foundational materials for what today many organizations are equating with microservices architectures and activities.
Excellent. You don't have the title of that book by Sam Newman, do you?
I do. Give me one.
We'll make it available on the blog and also through the Sumo Logic Chats hashtag on Twitter, so we'll follow up on that as well. But as we roll out the last minute,
Principles of Microservices.
Cool. That's an original title. I love it.
I'm sorry, no, it's building I'm wrong. Apologies. That's the title of his page. It's Building Microservices by O'Reilly.
Oh, even better. Even better. I love it. Building Microservices. So, JP, I want to thank you very much, and I also want to thank everyone for not only attending our session here today, but sticking through to the end. I'm really impressed the fact that our numbers stayed high all through the session here today. So this was hopefully useful to you. In speaking about the pitfalls of microservices, I want to thank JP Morgenthau for taking the time here to prepare and also to deliver today. My thanks go out also to David Gear at GearCom on Twitter, and also Mike DeKale, who also helped us provide some of the information here for our session. We will have an archived copy of this session available to you, and you can get this through the same link as you used to register here. And let's keep this going. Let's keep the conversation going through Twitter at Sumo Logic Chat. I want to thank the sponsors, Sumo Logic, for allowing us to put this on together today to talk about something that obviously will be a big story coming up in the future. So everybody, thank you very much for being here today. It's been a great pleasure hosting. My name is Steve Prentice. Once again, thanks to JP, and thanks for everybody for being here. So have a great day, and we'll see you online.